Welcome to the Santasa video learning series. This lesson is entitled Creating My First App, which is how to create a new app and ingest time-based event data. The objectives for this training include how to define the S3 connection, how to select and configure the from file process node, how to enable interactive mode for processing your data, how to execute your process data job, and how to inspect output tables for success. All right, let's get started. In order to create your first app, you need to invoke the creation icon, which is the green check mark up on the upper right-hand corner. Simply click that, and that will open up the new app creation window. Give it a name. I'm going to give this one training example. You'll see here that we recommend using underscores instead of spaces. As noted here in the app prefix section, these tend to get munged, so we recommend you put an underscore in there. Just makes it easier to keep track of, and especially when you're looking for your different app configurations within the Hive Metastore or something like that. The next thing we're going to do is select a template. For this particular training, we're going to use the synthesizer freeform. This will allow us to have a blank slate to build our new workflow on. Description field is optional, but we do recommend that you put something in the description field, especially if you're working on key business questions or specific stakeholder questions, or maybe you're creating a specific application for a certain niche product. It's always a good idea to give the description. When other users look at your app, they'll have an idea of what you're doing and how to follow along. So I'll just put just a little name in there. The next thing we're going to choose is the event store. There's one for us available called Training Event Store, and we'll choose that. An explanation of event stores and what they are and how they're created will all be covered in a separate video lesson, so watch for that. The default partition scheme is set to daily, and we'll just leave it at that. Our files that we're working with are daily files, so no need to change that. The next section is how we're going to share this app. If we choose the private option, this app will be just private to us. No one else can see the app. It's just for us to work on and view. And this is a good option if you're going to be taking time building an app and it's fairly complex. If you don't mind sharing the app with everybody, if it's a simple app, you can click the everybody public view, and everybody who logs into the interface will be able to see your app. The most useful one is probably the groups. We're going to click training in this particular scenario. If you have users that are in specific directorates or organizations and you want to keep your data applications separated because of the data content, this is a good option to do that. Once we've filled in all those fields, we'll simply hit the create button and create our app. And the next thing we need to do is access or invoke our app, and we can begin to create our workflow. As you can see here, we have a blank slate. To get into the edit mode, we'll click on the lock icon at the top. You'll see we're in edit mode now. We've got save options along the top menu. The first thing we're going to need to do is to add our connection. So you right click, hold, drag, drop, release. Pretty simple process. Click on the node once you get it on the workspace and choose the connection you want to use. In this instance, we're going to have a training S3 connection. And we'll also, once you choose it, show you some information about the connection that you're connecting to. Simply click on the green check on the right-hand side, and you'll notice that the connection now turns blue, meaning the configuration's been accepted. The next step is to add the from file process node. So in the left-hand menu under processes, we'll scroll down and find from file, click, drag, and drop that one onto the workspace. The next step is to, on the right-hand side of the connection, click over the black dot, drag, and connect to our from file node, you'll notice that the connection is established and the node turns white, meaning that the connection is good and we are ready to begin configuration. At this point, we want to turn on interactive mode. What this is going to do is create a private cluster that will allow you to run as many jobs as you need to during your creation process on a private cluster that nobody else is going to mess with. You'll notice when I clicked that this configuration menu opened up. The file that we are going to be working with, dated is 6/2/2016, and the interactive mode only will work with one particular file at a time. So we will have our from date and to date to be the same day, so we'll be working with just the one file. Under process mode, we're going to select drop and replace. Explanation of the different process modes and what those are and how they work and are used will be covered in a separate video lesson, just an FYI. But we will be using drop and replace because it will drop the table and overwrite it every time we rerun the process. So while we're in this configuration and development mode, we want to drop and replace the table multiple times. We'll set it to that mode. Next, we'll need to add a runtime so the system understands which runtime to use to run this cluster. And I'm just going to give it a name training and click on the runtime template and choose the training runtime, which is the one available for us in this option. Don't change the defaults, just we'll let them run as they are, and click the add button. You'll notice that the cluster has begun creating, as noted in the section here. You can expand that and it will give you information about the cluster creation process. And we're doing this right now because this process can take up to 10 minutes to complete as we're running on an AWS configuration right now. And we want to make sure that this cluster is up and running once we have completed doing our configurations in the from file and not have to wait for the cluster to spin up to process our job. And go ahead and click the save button here to save our configuration and click on the X in the upper right corner to close that configuration screen. And you'll notice at the top, we've got our date range now defined in our interactive mode. Right now, no cluster is running, but it is being created right now. So we're going to let that thing run and create. Okay, so the next step we need to do is start the configuration of our from file. So we will click on that node. And in the upper section of the configuration screen, there's double arrows. If you click on that, it will expand into full screen, which makes it a little easier to understand what's happening inside your data pipeline here. We'll talk about a couple of the left side menu items really quickly. Under Overview, Run History, there is none at this point because this is a brand new app. We haven't run any jobs yet, so there's nothing to see. But once you start running jobs, you will notice the status of when the job started and stopped, how long it took, and any log files that were created. The status section provides details about any required elements that are necessary from the connection that you connected to your from file process node. And as we can see here, at least one connection must be maintained. Yes, we've got a green check there. We added our S3 bucket. And the previous node must be configured, which we've got a green check there because we've got a nice blue icon in our S3 connection, meaning we have a valid connection connected. The next section, Notes. If you click on the Add Note, this is where you can give detailed descriptions about what you've created or what you're working on. Notes about the data file that you're working with, some of the challenges maybe that you're working with. Anyway, once you add those notes, there's a comment section that can be added to those. So this is a good place for your team or your group to collaborate on the applications that you're building and give feedback or just keep track of changes that you've made in the application. Next section we're going to talk about on the left side is the configuration section. First thing we'll click on is the General tab. And this provides you a place to give a name for your processing node. And it's probably a good idea to give it a unique name just to give you a better understanding of what you're putting in your pipeline, and it makes it easier to understand. So we're just going to call this file loader, just because this is what we're doing. We're loading the data. Next, we're going to click on Input. This is where we are going to define the path to the files in S3 that we're going to ingest into our application. The source path here is called training sample data. And I'm going to just copy that from another location really quickly and put it there. The source file pattern is used to specify the pattern of your data file so the system understands which data to ingest. And because you may potentially have a number of different file types within your folder. So you want to specify exactly which files you want to work with. In this example, we're working with a file pattern that has this beginning. This little section here, the data itself has a pattern of year, month, day in the file, but we don't want to just grab one file when we're ingesting. We want to be able to grab all the files. So we're replacing that date section with an asterisk, a dot asterisk, regular expression, to grab anything after that underscore before the .txt. The file type is a text file, and there is no compression. It is just a regular text file, so we just choose none. This file that we are working with is an Apache log file. So under data event format, we're going to choose Apache log. The Apache log format, because this has some different fields in it than just normal common logs, we're going to choose custom. And we're going to, for the ease of this demonstration, I'm just going to go ahead and pre-populate this regex pattern section with my regular expression that has been defined for this particular data set. And you'll notice there are capture brackets for the different columns in the data that we're ingesting. This data does not contain a header, but if it did, we could invoke this contains header radio button here, and that would force the system to ignore the first row when it ingested the data. The incremental load section is used to extract from the file name that date that we were just talking about up here and use it for creating file date partitions for the separate log files that you're going to be ingesting. The load type is daily, since these are daily files. And again, the date pattern, which we showed before, was year, month, day, and that's a 4-number year, 2-number month, 2-letter day. You'll notice the month is capitalized as the month. It needs to be capitalized. If it was lowercase, it would think it was minutes. The extraction method that we're going to use here is either index or regex, and because the file length and this field could potentially change over time, regex is a little better option to capture that field. And I'm going to just use this same pattern from above here and use that down here in our regex pattern. And because we're trying to capture that date field, I'm going to go ahead and put brackets around it to know that that's the capture group we're looking for. And since we only have one capture group, we just need to have group number here. We've got one capture group. That's the one we're going to grab. Date manipulation is used if your file contained earlier days than the file name suggested. So maybe you have files that were created for a week ago that are in that file name, you could potentially adjust the file date with the date manipulation section. It's not necessary for us, so we'll just continue on. The next section we're going to go to is the schema. This is the section where we define the fields that are contained within that data, or the columns that we're extracting out of that Apache log. And so we're going to add columns, and this must be a comma delimited listing of those file names. And I'm going to go ahead and just grab a copy of that I already have defined for training purposes here. And you'll notice that there are a number of fields, no spaces. There's an underscore for all the spaces, no spaces between the commas. Everything is nice and compact with a comma delimiter. And we'll just click apply. And you'll notice that the schema is now populated with those field elements. And those are actually what we've defined here or determined with our regex. You know, these particular fields correlate to each of these fields that are defined. Because this is time event data, we do have a time source, which is the date time field that we're extracting. That date time field is in a timestamp format, and that format is in year, month, day, hour, minute, second. And you have to make sure that you follow the format of your data to ensure that the system understands how to interpret that date field. No errors in our configuration so far, and we'll continue on to the output section. This is where we define the name of the output table, and I would recommend that you change the name of the table to give you a little better understanding or definition of what this table is used for. And this one, of course, is a loader that we're working on. So I'm gonna make sure that this is called loader, and the display name for this is going to be loader as well. Under the configuration section, this is just giving some definitions for how the partition file is going to be created, the format, and the delimiter for the partition file itself. Also compression. If this was a large file that we were unzipping to read in, we may want to zip it back up. But since this is just a small text file, we really don't need to use compression. And finally, the location in the event store where this table is going to be created. Now we simply click in the upper right green checkbox, and you'll notice that we have a nice light green color now to our file loader. This means that the configurations are good, no errors. If there was something wrong with the configuration, or maybe you had some error in one of the fields, this may be yellow, letting you know that there is something that the system has determined is not quite correct. And since everything is ready to go, we're going to simply click Save and Lock, because in order to run a job, the system must be locked to invoke the processing. So as we look up here, we will see in our interactive mode, we now have an active cluster running. So this is good for us. We'll be able to now run our job. To do that, we're simply going to hold down the Shift key and click on the file loader, and you'll notice that it gets a check mark and turns blue, meaning that that node has been selected and ready to be executed. Simply go to the top right under the Run section and click Run. You will notice that the job is initialized and being submitted for processing. Another thing that you'll notice is there is now an icon with a little green indicator on the activity section. So if we click that, we will see that the job is actually being submitted and getting ready to run. You'll know when the system starts processing your particular node, as this green node will turn white with a dashed line or ring around it, letting you know that the actual process is being worked on at the moment. And we'll wait just a few minutes to watch that change. Another thing just to mention while we're waiting for that to run, and there it goes. If you, anywhere in the white space of the workspace, if you scroll in and out, you can zoom your workflow or your pipeline in and out. And if you just right click and hold anywhere in the space, you can also move the elements around, which is somewhat helpful when you've got this side panel opened and you may want to watch what's going on with your configuration. And this is just a small file. It only contains 10 rows of data, so it shouldn't take but just a few moments to process. And there it is, it's finished. The node has turned dark green, which means that the processing is complete. If there was an error in the job, this node would have turned red, and you would have been able to click on this little icon in this activity section to open up the error log to see exactly what was wrong with your processing and some ideas on how to troubleshoot and fix it. But because everything is green and we're good to go, we'll simply click on the X in the upper and close that activity window. Okay, we've got our data processed, and now we've got what's known as the output table. This actually gives us information about the table that was created from our processing node. So simply click on that node, and I want to kind of drag it up so we see what we're looking at here. In this section, the overview section, there's a couple of different things to talk about. Details provides information about the table created from this process node. It's useful for understanding where your table is located and also gives information about the dataset name and the database associated with this particular table. Schema is exactly the same as in the file loader itself. This is the fields of data that are being extracted out of the data. The state is a very useful one. This tells you the file date that was processed, the number of rows in the data, and the size of the data in gigabits. So this has got 0 because that file is tiny. And lastly, clicking on preview provides you with a glimpse into the processed data table. So this is what that processed data looks like. These are those defined schema headers that we created in our configuration field. And you'll see that we've got a nice table of clean data ready to be used by our downstream systems, either our analysts or to be used as a step in the next process, which will be in the next video where we will connect a transform node. So now we'll simply click on the black X right here and get out of that particular view. The lesson for now is completed, so our interactive mode is no longer needed. So we'll simply click on that and turn off the interactive mode. It's going to ask us if we want to shut down that runtime, and click yes, and you'll notice that the runtime has shut down. So now we are completed with this app, and to get back to the workspace, in the upper left here, there's a little back arrow. Simply click on that, and you have now returned to the home page. This concludes this lesson.